This is a Trident Disabilities audio archive recording from the Public Domain Review, essay titled The Art of Whaling, Illustrations from the Logbooks of Nantucket Whaleships by Jessica Boyal, published January 13th, 2021, read by Angela Luttrell. The 19th century whale hunt was a brutal business, awash with blubber, blood, and the cruel destruction of life. But between the frantic calls of, quote, "there she blows," end quote, there was plenty of time for creation too. Jessica Boyal explores the rich vein of illustration running through the logbooks and journals of Nantucket whalers. First, we start with a picture that appears to be a painting of a ship in the background from the 18th century, that in the forefront we have about four small ships that have about 4 to 5 shadow figures in them that appear to be trying to get the whales. You can see the back ends of the tails that are sticking out of the water and the first third of their bodies that are also sticking out of the water, with various colors of red, orange, and yellow that is water coming out of their blowhole that actually looks like a heart. And you can see there's about 3 different colors of blue with white mixed in to depict the chaos of the water. Underneath the photo it says, "A whale chase depicted in the log of the ship Washington, kept by James G. Coffin, 1842 to 1844. The first European settlers arrived at Nantucket, an isolated island some 30 miles from Cape Cod, Massachusetts, in 1659. They built homes, Quaker meeting houses, and cattle farms, swiftly and forcibly colonizing the island, which was until then inhabited by 2,500 Wampanoag Native Americans. The word Nantucket is a Native American one, meaning either, quote, faraway land, or sandy, sterile soil tempting no one, end quote. And the colonizers soon found it thus, too small and infertile to accommodate the number of agricultural plots necessary to support their growing population. So they looked to the sea, according to the legend quite literally, in 1690, when town selectmen climbed a sloping hill overlooking the southern coast. Here they watched whales breach the Atlantic's surface and pronounced the ocean, quote, a green pasture where our children's grandchildren will go for bread, end quote. This declaration proved prophetic, as for some 200 years Nantucket dominated the global whaling market. Such was its success that in 1851 Herman Melville in Moby Dick marveled, quote, what wonder then that these Nantucketers born on a beach should take to the sea for a livelihood. Thus have these naked Nantucketers, these sea hermits, issuing from their anthill in the sea, overrun and conquered the watery world like so many Alexanders, end quote. In its early days, Nantucket whaling looked very different from the hub of activity that Melville, writing from his own experience, described. Initially, whaling took place close to Nantucket shores, where viewing platforms from which whales could be spotted were erected. Sightings might take place any time from November to April, as during these months, hordes of right whales, so called because they were the right whale to catch, returned from the summer of feeding in their far reaches of the North Atlantic. Their migratory route took them within a few miles of Nantucket. It then shows a map that does really look like a whale, where it is very thin on the left-hand side, goes a little bit diagonal downward, and then it gets thicker as it goes downward towards the right-hand side, and it almost looks like a whale's tail is up on the top right-hand side. It has a kind of a directional compass on the top left, and in the circle on the bottom left of it says Map of the Island of Nantucket. Below it says Nantucket and adjacent Tuckernuck, combining to look suspiciously whale-like in a map from 1782. Once a whale was spotted, a crew of up to 6 men, including indentured Wampanoag and Nauset Native Americans would board 20-feet-long cedar boats in pursuit of their prey. If a boat drew even with the whale, then it would be harpooned and, following a chase, lanced and brought down. The dead leviathan was then hauled back to the bay, where blubber and baleen were flensed from its carcass and transported to try houses. The blubber was boiled for oil, which was cooled, poured into casks, and sold alongside scrubbed whalebone at markets in New York, Boston, and further afield. This method of shore fishery was gory, lucrative, and unsustainable. By 1730, the waters around Cape Cod and Nantucket had been overfished and the number of whales woefully depleted. But by this point, Nantucket's whaling market was booming. The collapse of the Dutch North Atlantic fisheries, combined with increased demands for oil in Britain and America, had driven oil prices upwards from around £8 sterling per barrel in 1725 to £10 in 1730. And so, incentivized by these convincingly healthy markets, well-off Nantucket merchants outfitted single-mast sailing vessels with dedicated crews and pursued their prey northward into the deeper waters. Deeper sea voyages made for longer expeditions, meaning that whalers might spend up to 4 years at sea, and as a consequence, two sorts of written and illustrated records emerged. The first was the logbook, an official, often tedious account kept by captains and first mates, which held administrative and financial information required by a ship's owners. The second type of record was the unofficial journal, which might be maintained by anyone on board ship. For although maritime life was arduous and sometimes frantic, a sailor or passenger over the course of months at sea could find time for reflection and creativity and turn their hand to a variety of artistic pursuits. One such pursuit was scrimmage handering, the craft of using a jackknife or needle to engrave designs into bone and ivory obtained from whale teeth and walrus tusks. A work in scrimshaw could be decorated with a variety of subjects, including whaling scenes and ship's portraits of lovers and Masonic emblems. We then have a picture of a whale scene that is, it looks like on a tusk or a tooth. We don't know yet, but it is flat, vertical on the left-hand side, and the very bottom is flat, and it is curved on the top and to the right-hand side. And if you look closely, you have to squint a little bit, but it has waters that look wavy, and you can see the whales are sticking their heads out of the water. You see a couple tails and what looks to be ships with little ships in the water with pointed maybe weapons out of them, probably being held to hunt the whales. And we see a large ship, likely that is issuing the smaller ships from it. So that larger ship appears to probably be like 1800s or 1700s based. Below that it says scrimshaw of a dramatic whaling scene carved by Edward Burdett, now in the Nantucket Whaling Museum. Born in 1805 and on Nantucket, Burdett went on his first whaling voyage at the age of 17. 10 years later, now a deck officer, he died a tragic death. A harpoon line, quote, running out, end quote, from the deck caught around his feet and dragged him overboard to drown in the ocean. The other strand of artistic practice was on paper rather than three-dimensional. Although their rationales differed, both logbooks and journals were also frequently illustrated, replete with images of daily shipboard life, of faraway lands, and most frequently of whales. Hundreds of these have been preserved and digitized by the Nantucket Historical Association. The selection here, mainly from the 1840s, gives a unique insight into the world of Nantucket whaling. Ship's officers used logbooks for a variety of practical reasons, charting different species, sightings, and killings. Some logbooks, like that of the ship Indian Chief, kept by Thomas R. Bloomfield, contain careful, intricately patterned drawings of the creatures, accompanied by the coordinates of where they were spotted. There's also a picture shown below with an open book on the right side of very small print, cursive handwriting with one integrated hand-drawn small picture of a lighthouse. On the left open page, there's whale drawings, 3 columns of them, about 13 whales on each column, except the inner column, which is the 3rd column. There's about 5 or 6 whales drawn, and then they are drawn facing the opposite direction, drawn upwards. So it looks as if there is a largest whale that is in the inner spine of the book. That one indicates that it says drawings of whales in the log of the ship Indian Chief, kept by Thomas R. Bloomfield, 1842 to 1844. There's an additional picture below this that has a closer picture of another page where between the 2 paragraphs of cursive handwriting, there's 2 whales, both blue where the noses are touching and the tails are up and out back towards their noses. And they have blowholes where it is brown and they're crisscrossing each other and their mouth is agape. Below that picture it says more drawings of whales in the log of the ship Indian Chief, kept by Thomas R. Bloomfield, 1842 to 1844. Others include imprints made from the stamps that, cut in the likeness of whales, were fashioned from pieces of wood, ivory, or bone. Different stamps were made to represent different species and carry different connotations. An image of a whale's tail fluke denoted a whale sighting, whilst one of an entire whale, its slaughter. This visual lexicon, a semitonic language that even Roland Barthes might have appreciated, was developed as an efficient means of recording expeditions for vessel owners, who rather than wading through dense logbooks written in cursive, often messy script, might prefer to ascertain a voyage's success by tallying the number of stamps the log contained. There's another picture below this that is an open book that has a page on the left and the page on the right. It almost looks like the page on the left is a stamped partial copy of the page on the right. You really can't tell the scribble on the left-hand side because a lot of it is in pencil. But on the right-hand side, though some of it is in pencil, a lot of it almost just looks to be a stamp of the back half of a whale. So you can't see its head, but you can see from its stomach to the back end of its tail. And you see maybe 2 to 4 full-size whale stamps. Under this it says, whale stamps in the opening end papers of the log of the ship Alabama, kept by Barker B. Marshall, 1846 to 1850. Beyond official records, many journals were illustrated in ways that point to the sheer visual pleasures of the adventures with whale chases, a popular subject. The act of killing a whale deep at sea was not substantially different from doing so at shore, though the object of the hunt was no longer the right whale, but the sperm whale, prized for its body oil of higher grade than that of other cetaceans, and its spermaceta, a precious liquid wax found in its head. Once a whale was sighted, which according to the logs was a relatively rare event, the crew would lower whale boats from the main vessel into the water. Vessels could contain up to 5 whale boats, a larboard boat, starboard boat, bow boat, waist boat, and sometimes a starboard bow boat. Each was manned by a boat header and up to 5 rowers. We have a picture below that is a hand illustration of water with a man on the left-hand side with reins into the whale's mouth, man riding its tail, and he has a black outfit on with a black hat. Behind the whale, he has 2 boats being manned by men, and there is cursive writing that you can't really make out above these pictures. The first picture says, the, quote, Nantucket sleigh ride, end quote, pictured in the log of the ship Susan, kept by Reuben Russell, 1841 to 1846. The next picture is very similar. It has all the cursive writing at the very top, and at the very bottom, it's a colorful hand drawing of a man on the tail of a whale with reins, driving the whale with its water coming out of its spout, and one boat being driven with men with red outfits, black hats, and looks like they are rowing the boat. Below this is described, it says, the, quote, Nantucket sleigh ride, end quote, pictured in the log of the ship Susan, kept by Reuben Russell, 1841 to 1846. As with shore whaling, the key was to draw close to the great mammal before striking it with a harpoon attached to a long coil of rope. Once the harpoon's iron was firmly lodged into the creature's flesh, then it would either promptly die or more commonly flee, in which case a, quote, Nantucket sleigh ride, end quote, would ensue. During this chase, the frenzied whale would boat with the boats in tow until eventually, exhausted, the Leviathan would collapse and be pierced to a gruesome death. The cruelty of the hunt is not something that generally comes across in the logbook and journal depictions, where the blood and gore are replaced by anthropomorphized whales, complete with unfathomably merry faces. Perhaps the brutality of whaling was difficult to reconcile with the principles of pacifism and nonviolence that supposedly underpinned the Nantucketers' Quaker way of life. Below we have one picture that depicts three separate page portions. The very top portion of the picture is two whales, black, swimming to the right-hand side, almost swimming through the words of a page. The middle picture, which is right below, is three whales that are gray swimming through the page of words. And the very bottom is two dark gray whales swimming on the very left-hand side of the page. And in the middle, you see a little bit of blue water that is colored in with the tail going into the water. This says, Merry Whales in the log of the ship Susan, kept by Reuben Russell. The success of the hunt was more or less dependent on the tractability of the whale. For the most part, the creatures were fortunately docile, but some proved formidable adversaries. Such a beast was to be the undoing of the whale ship, the Essex, which departed from Nantucket on August 12, 1819. Captained by George Pollard, the 18-man crew was scheduled to spend 2.5 years at sea, but disaster struck on November 20th, 1820. On this day, the crew spotted a pod of sperm whales. Whaleboats were greedily launched, and several calves corralled. One smashed into a whaleboat, forcing its retreat, during which the captain boy spotted an ominous shape looming beneath the Essex bow. The shape, it transpired, was a colossal sperm whale, some 85 feet in length, weighing approximately 80 tons. The Essex first mate, Owen Chase, recounts that, quote, I could distinctly see him smite his jaws together, as if distracted with rage and fury, end quote, and goes on to describe how the monumental creature, and in italics it says, appeared with tenfold fury and vengeance in his aspect. The surf flew in all directions about him, and his course towards us was marked by a white foam of a rod in width, which he made with the continual violent thrashing of his tail. His head was about half out of the water, and in that way he came upon us and again struck the ship. We then have a pencil-drawn picture that is of a large boat that has a huge sperm whale coming towards the bow of it. Below the boat, you can see closer in the forefront of the picture, would be about 4 or 5 smaller ships that were individually manned. Below it says, drawing of Essex being struck by the whale, sketched later in life by Thomas Nickerson, who is a cabin boy on the ship, and more than 50 years later wrote about the ordeal in The Loss of the Ship, quote, end quote, Essex, 1876. The irate whale rammed into the Essex twice, sinking at some 2,000 nautical miles west of South America. The crew had just enough time to evacuate the ship into 3 small boats. 8 crew members survived by cannibalizing 7 others, drawing lots to decide who shall live and who should be eaten. The horrors of the Essex, as described in Owen Chase's narrative, provided fodder for the climatic scenes of Melville's great American novel Moby Dick, which narrates the story of doomed anti-hero captains Ahab's quest for revenge on the great white sperm whale Moby Dick. The epic culminates in a 3-day chase in which the majestic Moby Dick demolishes the fictional Pequod, leaving Ishmael's, the ship's survivor, and the true protagonist adrift at sea. We then have a picture that is colored, and at the very top says "Island seen by," and at the bottom, "Ship Nauticon." In the middle is in the water, blue, and the ship is sailing to the left, and it has an American flag behind it, and it has 3 flags at the very top. The very left flag is white and has a blue N. The middle flag has white in the middle and each blue on the left and the right side, and then the right flag is half white and half blue. And in the background on the left-hand side, you can see a little white house, a lighthouse, and a White House. Below the picture, it says, title page of Susan C. Austin's Veinder's Whaling Journal. Of course, not all expeditions were so utterly dismal. Indeed, some afforded rare opportunities for working men and occasionally even women to travel the world. Susan C. Austin Veeder was one of the first Nantucket women to accompany their husband to sea. Her decision to do so was perhaps motivated by more than a sense of adventure, given that on his next voyage, her husband deferred from his post as captain, took up with a Polynesian woman, and never returned home. Susan's journey aboard the Nauticon, which departed from Nantucket in September 1848 and returned in March 1853, took her across the Atlantic around Cape Horn to ports in Chile, Oahu, Tahiti, and as far north as the Fox Islands in the Arctic. Her journal, though written in terse, bleakly efficient language, brims with panoramic watercolors that judiciously delineate the places that she visited and make clear that she was alive to her surroundings. We then have a picture that are 2 pages from Susan C. Austin Veeder's Whaling Journal. On each page, there's 2 paintings, so a total of 4 paintings. On the left page, they are lighter blue waters with rocks in the water and rocks that have greenery at the very top, so that's very tall. The bottom left painting has just 1 large ship in it. The top left painting has about 2 or 3 large ships in it. The right page has darker blue waters. The top left has less rocks in it, mostly greenery and mountains, just 1 large ship. The bottom right doesn't have any ships, just wavy blue water and very tall mountainous scenes. Susan's voyage, punctuated by acute seasickness and the fear of rancid whale flesh, was not altogether a happy one. After a few months aboard the Nauticon, she gave birth to a, quote, a fine daughter weighing 9 pounds, end quote, who she describes as, quote, growing like a pig, end quote. 14 months later, the child was treated for teething issues by a doctor in Tahiti, who, according to Susan's journal, administered a white powder to her gums. The child died, apparently poisoned by the doctor, and though Susan did not immediately return to Nantucket, her journey was marred by the loss. Familial plight weighs heavily in the annals of Nantucket's whalers, though not all as tragically as in Susan's account. Richard C. Gibbs Jr.'s log of the ship Nantucket, captained by his father, attests to the predictably normal anxieties of an adolescent. Richard was 13 years old when he accompanied his mother, Almira, and father Richard C. Gibbs Sr. onto the Nantucket, which set sail in June 1855. In his log, he expresses fear of not living up to his father's expectations, reservations about his own inadequacies as log keeper, and his hopes for self-improvement. Some of these sentiments are, albeit abstractly, captured on the opening end papers of his log, which alongside sketches of whales, anchors, and his ship, features the word quote-unquote hope in emphatic black lettering, and lower down the page, quote-unquote blood in scrawled scarlet script. We then have an open book page, open book with 2 pages. On the left page is a sideways picture of blue water with a large sailing ship and sporadic pictures of whale, both in brown marker or dark paint, and then some of them are in pencil. On the right open page, we have a bold word hope, a couple flags. Each flag has a different type of drawn whale on it. And then we also have some solid and not fully filled in solid whales. It says, in paper doodles, in the log of the ship Nantucket by Richard C. Gibbs, Jr. Richard complains of his and his family's inadequacies, their failure to catch enough whales, and consequent inability to make their fortunes at sea. But his condemnations of ineptitude may have been unfounded. By 1840, global whaling grounds had been sorely overfished. This fact, combined with a rising demand for petroleum and its derivative kerosene, produced in the oil fields of Pennsylvania, undermined the North American whaling market. By the 1870s, a series of events, including the Great Fire of 1846 and the American Civil War, had brought Nantucket to its knees. No local industry could succeed or replace the whale fishery, and so between 1840 and 1870, its population plummeted from almost 10,000 to little more than 4,000. Nantucket's heyday was over, and so the island's grizzly whaling trade proved valuable but not forgettable. It remains vividly in the journals and logs of its practitioners. The illustrations of these accounts constitute a form of folk art which affords remarkable insight into the extraordinary lives and creativity of the Nantucketers in an era before their, quote, greasy luck, end quote, ran out.